Jim is the president of the Paoli Battlefield Preservation Fund and has been on the board for the past 7 years. Jim is an avid history buff and is also vice president of the American Revolution Roundtable of Philadelphia, the vice president of the Brandywine Valley Civil War Roundtable, a board member of the Christian Sanderson Museum in Chadds Ford, and is treasurer of Historical Military Impressions, Inc., a nonprofit military reenactment group that performs in several states. Jim works as Director of Client Services for Integrated Software Solutions Incorporated in Fraser, Pennsylvania, and has an associate's degree in business administration. Jim is married and lives on what was the Battle of the Clouds battlefield, a Revolutionary War battlefield in West Whiteland Township, Chester County, Pennsylvania. Jim's talk is titled Remember Paoli, and then Jim, at the end of your talk, I would ask you to talk about your preservation activity out there on the battlefield at Paoli, if you would.
Sure, no problem at all. Okay, hopefully you can see my...
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, good. Good. All right, so move that off of here. Okay, this is a painting that was done by memory 5 years after the battle by one of the participants in it. And it is very realistic. If you go there today, the battlefield pretty much looks exactly like this. You can see different elements in the painting, which I'll go over, but this was directly from somebody who fought at the battle, and we'll do that. The name of the person who did this painting was sort of lost to history. There were a couple suspects. It was narrowed down. I think it was somebody from Wisconsin, a professor, figured it out first in the mid 80s. And in the early, I'd say probably mid 2015 or 2016 or so, the Museum of the American Revolution agreed with this professor about who the author of this painting is. But first, let me show you some of the intricacies of this painting. I call it Witness to a Battle. The first thing you'll notice, you'll see this dead person on the ground. That is Captain William Wolfe. He's the only British officer killed in the Battle of Paoli. And he's going to get a burial at Church of the Great Valley, which is a Anglican church. Over here, this person holding his arm, that was also thought to be possible author of the painting, but that is Lieutenant Martin Hunter. Lieutenant Martin Hunter gets shot through the hand and actually almost bleeds to death. But the eventual discovery of the author of this painting, he actually found Lieutenant Martin Hunter and brought him got him medical attention before he bled to death. And he lived on to fight at the Battle of Germantown, both of them. Booths and wigwams, you're going to hear this tale when I read it. These were shelters. Mike had talked about the Battle of the Clouds, how the rain was raining sideways, got the cartridges wet, and therefore the powder was of no good to the Continental Army. Well, it was drizzling that night, and Anthony Wayne had his men build these shelters to store their gunpowder and some weapons. And they're not for the troops. A lot of people not familiar with history think the men slept in these shelters. They did not. This was basically just for their supplies. What's going to happen at the Battle of Paoli? A lot of these men are going to run inside those shelters seeking shelter from the British. The British are coming at them with bayonets. And what some of the British do, as you can see in the above the picture closest to you, is they keep the men in the structures with their bayonets, and then another company goes around and light the structures on fire. And we actually have Lieutenant Martin Hunter tell that. He said they'd rather face the flames than face the cold tip of the British steel, which means their bayonets. So you can see that they were afraid of the bayonets. That's why a lot of these men perished in the huts. The massacre aspect, this has been called the Paoli Massacre, mainly by the Patriots. The Patriots are calling this the Paoli Massacre because this is very messy, bloody battle. But was this really a massacre? If you have a massacre, you usually have a command and control decision. That would mean General Howe or General Gray, who was in charge of the troops going into the Battle of Paoli, was given the order or gave the order that no quarter should be done. Now, he has a sort of a spotty reputation, but we can find no written evidence that this was that he gave the order show no quarter to the Americans. Also, the fact that even John Andre points this out. He's a captain at the time. He's here at Paoli, and he even says, "We captured 74 prisoners. How can it be a massacre if we captured prisoners?" So keep that in the back of your mind. The author of the painting turns out to be Lieutenant Richard St. George. He is of Irish heritage. He's an Irish nobleman, and he is wondering why anyone would want to leave the British Empire. Why would you want to give up all these rights you have as a British citizen and start over again and rebel against this country that's so wonderful? So he's definitely gung-ho. He does get wounded in the Battle of Brandywine in the ankle. He vows that he has more blood to give to the cause. And during the Battle of Paoli, you can see his mindset changes. He's definitely very affected by this battle. And apparently 5 years afterwards, he travels to Italy and meets Xavier Delgado. And Xavier Delgado does the painting for him. And Xavier Delgado has never been to the United States, so he hasn't seen the ground or known it, but St. George basically gives him the sketchings of what he says was the Battle of Paoli. You know, woods, everyone knows pretty much what woods are, and an open meadow where they fought this. It was actually a farmer's field. It's a little bit in contrast to the Battle of Germantown painting, which is also a Delgado painting. And in that one, they have sort of like an Italian villa instead of a Pennsylvania farmhouse out there. So this is the author of the painting. You're going to hear a little bit of him when I start going into the battle about some of the things he says about it. Now, Mike alluded into this about where the Paoli battlefield is. A lot of people think, I'm in Paoli, it got to be somewhere in Paoli, but in fact, it's in Malvern, Pennsylvania. And the reason it's not called the Battle of Malvern is because Malvern Borough was founded in 1889, 113 years after the battle. So why was it called the Battle of Paoli? Well, it's because of this structure right here. This is the Paoli Tavern. And this picture was taken in 1886. So this is a post-Civil War photo of it. They're saying the original part of is right here. The original part of the structure is there, but this is the original General Paoli Tavern. It's now at this point just called the Paoli Tavern, having shaved the general off of it. So why was it called Paoli again? Well, we know it was because of the tavern, and it was actually because of a feast on St. Patrick's Day. And during the feast, they were toasting different things, the king, the tavern dog, whoever it happened to be, and somebody actually raised a glass and toasted Pasquale Paoli. And these people who were here just love the name. In fact, the owner changed the name of his inn from the Duffmar Tavern to the Paoli Tavern, or the General Paoli Tavern, because of that toast. So who is General Pasquale Paoli? Well, his name is Filippo Antonio Pasquale de Paoli. If you read about him, he sounds really great. Corsican patriot leader, president of the Executive Council of the General Diet of the People of Corsica. Paoli designed and wrote a constitution of the state. The Corsican Republic was a representative democracy. So if you read that, you're thinking, hey, he just copied our constitution, and it's set up as obviously we're a representative democracy, meaning we're voting. We don't have kings, we don't have queens, we don't have any quote unquote masters, as he put it. He held his office by election, not by appointment, made him commander-in-chief of the armed forces as well as the chief magistrate. So this is sort of sounding like the United States Constitution. Well, he wrote this in 1755. And this was the first constitution written under the Enlightenment principles. The problem that we have is Corsica is a contested island. It's between Italy and France. And France is now assuming control, or wants control, of Corsica. So when the French troops and France makes their claim that Corsica is theirs, they have to send Paoli away into an area he's going to be safe. So if you're enemy of the French during the colonial period, you're going to go to somewhere friendly who's anti-French, and that would be to Great Britain. In Great Britain, the reporters start reporting about him and about his government. That information makes its way over to the United States in the newspapers, and that's how these people learn about Pasquale Paoli. So that's how the battle gets its name, because of the tavern, not because of the city. The city wasn't there, but it all dates back, really, the genesis of it, to this person, Pascal Paoli. As we said, this is part of the Philadelphia campaign. You can see all the stuff that happened, landing ahead of Elka, Maryland, the Battle of Cooch's Bridge, the Battle of Brandywine, the Battle of the Clouds happened. At this point, Washington's going to split his forces. He's going to go, as Mike said, to the Reading Furnace area, and he's going to get the ammunition that they need, especially the gunpowder that was ruined by the rain at the Battle of the Clouds. So Wayne, he selects Anthony Wayne because Anthony Wayne's house, Waynesboro, is probably about 3 or 4 miles from the battlefield, the actual battlefield. So Anthony Wayne knows this area. He's a very prominent businessman in this area. So he does know the road network and he knows where he's going. So that's why Washington places him under command. He gives him about 2,000 troops, and he gives him 4 cannon, and he gives him some dragoons to carry out his mission. His mission: stay behind Howe and attack from the rear if the army is in motion. So if the army right now, which is camped at Tidifferent, if they get up and they start marching down Swedesford Road to cross the Swedes Ford in Norristown, or the Fatland Ford, or anything like that, he's to get up and attack them when they're in those nice, neat little columns in the road, to slow down, hoping that'll give Washington enough time to get resupplied and help Wayne out. Wayne is very confident his position is secure, because remember, he's sneaking behind the back of the British. He doesn't want to let them know the British are there. So I have 2 different messages that Wayne sends to Washington, and these are 2 days before the battle. This is on the 18th before, this is during the Battle of Valley Forge, as Mike had talked about earlier. This is 7:30 in the morning. Wayne writes to Washington. He says, "Our enemy is beating reveille," meaning he hears activity in their camp in Tidifferent. "I ordered our troops under arms and began to march to their left flank. When I arrived within a half mile of their encampment, found they had not stirred, but lay too compact to admit an attack with prudence. Indeed, their supineness answers every purpose of giving you time to get up. If they attempt to move, I shall attack them at all events. There never was, nor never will be, a finer opportunity of giving the enemy a fatal blow than the present. For God's sakes, move on as fast as possible." He's speaking, of course, to George Washington. So those alarm bells that he hears going off in the camp are the raid on Valley Forge. At 10:30 that day, or the next day, this is the 19th, he writes another message to General Washington. He has not heard from General Washington now for a while. And he says, "Our enemy are very quiet, washing and cooking. They will probably attempt to move towards evening. I expect General Maxwell on their left flank every moment as I lay on the right. We only want you in the rear to complete Mr. Howe's business. I believe he knows nothing of my situation, as I have taken every precaution to prevent any intelligence of getting to him, at the same time keeping a watchful eye on his front flanks and rear." And then he closes it out, "I have not heard from you for some time." That should kind of give you pause in what's happening. Well, what did happen is loyalist spies and patrols in the area are giving alarm to Howe. They're seeing his troops, they're seeing people in the Pennsylvania line at the Paoli Tavern or around that area. And he actually does have to, he's too close to the Paoli Tavern. He actually moves to the hills above the Warren Tavern. So he has moved position at least once, possibly even twice. There's even a British patrol that goes by and thinks they see his camp when they hear gunshots, and they gallop off, and here it's just hunters hunting for pheasant. It's not actually part of the encampment, but you can see there's spies all around looking for him. The bad news for Anthony Wayne is that one of Washington's messengers who's supposed to report back to Anthony Wayne, either by happenstance or by being or by physically giving up and deserting, walks into General Howe's camp in Tidifferent and has a message from General Washington to Anthony Wayne. And the message is, this is Washington now talking to Anthony Wayne: "By the advice of my general officers, I have determined that the army under my immediate command cross the Schuylkill River at Parker's Ford and endeavor to get down in time to oppose the enemy in front, while your corps under your command, in conjunction with General Smallwood and Colonel Gist of the Maryland Militia, act to the greatest advantage in the rear." So these Maryland militia are making a hot, or have been expected since the Battle of the Clouds. They're late. And they're late. Their supply train is really slow in keeping them supplied. But these are raw men that they've recruited out of Maryland. They have no fighting experience, and they're doing a grueling march from Maryland up to the Great Valley area to help Anthony Wayne out. They're going to help make his force from 2,000 to 4,000, and hopefully that'll help him in the upcoming battle of the British. At least that's Washington's plan. The problem is now Howe knows all this, and he knows that there's possibly 4,000 people in back of him, and Washington is supposed to be in front of him, meaning he has to cross the Schuylkill and get down in time in front of him, in front of the Schuylkill River, so he can pin them between, he can pin Howe's army between Washington and Wayne. So he's first afraid that this could be a trap. And then he says, if I take out Wayne's army, now I can turn and do my full attention to General Washington's army. So he's going to tap his best light infantryman, that's Colonel Gray, with an attack plan. And this is a portrait of Colonel, or Charles No Flint Gray, as they called him. This is actually from his India days. He ended up being a commander in India. I think he was the last commander of British forces in the United States when they evacuated in New York. So he is a long-term incident. They call him No Flint Gray. He earns this nickname for this battle. It's going to be a nighttime bayonet attack. He's going to ask the men to remove the flints from their muskets. The reason they're going to do this is because this is going to be a nighttime attack. If you see a muzzle flash, you know that's going to be the enemy. He doesn't want any friendly firing happening. It's going to be a confusing scene at night. So this is going to be a sword and bayonet attack only. So that's why he has the flints removed from his muskets. Now there is a company, Major Maitland's division within the 2nd Light Infantry that is going to keep their weapons loaded. And basically Colonel Gray, or Charles Gray, General Charles Gray, allows Major Maitland to do this, but he says, if you give away our position, there'll be severe consequences. And Maitland, to his credit, accepts that condition, and he goes off to battle. His men do have, already do have their flints and their muskets. And you'll see at the end that they're going to use them in attacking the Maryland militia when we get to the actual battle. General Gray does have, as I said, a little spotty reputation. This is one of them. This happened about a year after Paoli. He decimated the 3rd Regiment of the Continental Light Dragoons at a place called Old Tappan. They were actually digging, I think, footers for the Tappan Zee Bridge when they came across Tanner's, or Herring's tannery, which was on the site. At least 69 dragoons were killed, injured, or taken prisoner. 11 were killed outright. 4 were left for dead and died of their wounds. 6 were thrown into tanning vats. And the vats, as I said, were from Herring's tannery, which used to be on the site. The remains were identified by artifacts such as buttons and clothing regiment. Tories gave away the location of the Americans that were hiding in the barns. He went in and basically bayoneted these people, some say after they surrendered. Bergen County actually turned this into a park, so you can go there today. The stone draped by the 2 flags says, in memory of the American soldiers killed during the Revolutionary War and Baylor's massacre on September 28, 1778, Lieutenant George Baylor's 3rd Regiment of the Continental Dragoons took quarters for the night at several nearby farms. Tories betrayed their presence to a British force who surrounded the dragoons. During the night, a number of Americans were killed or wounded after they surrendered. So, as I said, he does have a spotty record of doing some things, Colonel Gray. Now, who is Gray with that night? 2nd Light Infantry, which is the 49th and 66th of Foot. There's about 500 of men in that battalion. The 44th Regiment of Foot, about 350. The most numerous, the 42nd Royal Highlander Regiment, or the Black Watch, there's 600 of them. They're going to form a double rank line and go through the camp. And as one person said, they killed and wounded no more than 300 men with their ride through camp. And the Royal Highlander Regiment also, and if you read Mike's book on Germantown, something that wasn't picked up in Tom McGuire's book is they have a bone to pick with Anthony Wayne's men because of some of the battles in New York, and they're out for revenge, and they're definitely going to get it here at Paoli. There are some dragoons that take place in the battle. They're going to have about 3-foot long saber blades that are going to come and attack the Americans that night. And Colonel Musgrave is going to sort of be held in reserve in this battle, and I'll tell you about it. His what I call his blocking force consists of the 40th and 55th troops. There's about 500 of them. They're going to stand watch over at the Paoli Tavern. A portion of that force is going to go search Anthony Wayne's home, Waynesboro, because he could be home. Like I said, he's about 4 or 5 miles from the battlefield, an easy ride to get there and back, but he's going to stay with the men. In fact, all throughout the whole Revolutionary War, he does not set foot at his home in Waynesboro. Actually, his wife, Paoli, writes that the British were very gentlemanly. They checked a few things. They barely disturbed anything. They looked around and left. Actually, his husband's not going to face that when they meet at the fields in Malvern. So the British objective, you're looking at it right there in the center, the British bayonet. Americans are afraid of the bayonet. A lot of them don't know how to use it. As I said, this is before Valley Forge, when the Americans were taught how to use the bayonet in an offensive manner. What the plan of the British is: station Colonel Musgrave's forces by the Paoli Tavern as a blocking force. I call it the hammer and the anvil. That would be the anvil. A small detachment of that anvil is going to be sent to Waynesboro to look for Anthony Wayne. General Gray's forces attack from the west and push Wayne's forces to the east. That is the hammer. So he's pushing these forces to the Paoli Tavern. And what he's hoping is Wayne's forces will be caught between 2 British forces with no possibility of escape. So I have a little map of where everything is. You can see up here in Tadifferin, this is the British camp of Howe. Musgrave's men are going to make a beeline for the Paoli Tavern. They're also going to send people down to Waynesboro and actually come back for the battle. General Gray's men are going to come down Sweetsford Road. They're going to make their way into the Warren Tavern, and they hope to come around Sugartown Road and push Anthony Wayne's men towards the Paoli Tavern, and hopefully that'll be the end of Anthony Wayne and the entire battle. So that's the British plan of thought. Again, hooking, getting behind the American troops, pushing them east, where Musgrave's forces are at the Paoli Tavern. They're caught between 2 armies, and that's it. So, switching to the other side, General Anthony Wayne. Who does he have with him at Malvern right now? He has the 1st Brigade under Colonel Thomas Hartley of York County. And you can see Hartley has about close to 1,200 men. The 2nd Brigade is under Colonel Richard Humpton of Yorkshire, England. He has been in America. He has sided with the Americans. General Washington has actually commended him for getting the boats he needed to cross the Delaware River during the Battle of Trenton, so he's held in high esteem. Richard Humpton will then later become, near the end of the war, a brigadier general in the Pennsylvania line. Extras, he got 4 cannon and 37 personnel. 3 troops are dragoons. So he has about 2,183 men. Now, not all of these are fighting men. They're obviously, as I said, look at the 37 personnel for the cannon. They're actually different things. He has 26 supply wagons to deal with, all pulled by at least a team of 4 horses or oxen. So there's a lot of stuff that he had, or the 2,100 men aren't exactly all combat ready. He's also waiting on 2,100 Maryland Militia to arrive, and that'll boost his force, actually double his force. So on the American objective in the Battle of Paoli, Wayne is awaiting 2,100 Maryland militiamen under his command of General William Smallwood to reinforce his men. And once he gets his men, they move up to where the Tadifferin camp is. They watch the camp, and if the British start getting into motion, they're going to attack them. If they're not, if they're just staying in their camp, they're not going to do that. This is going to hopefully allow time for Washington to help them out. Have Wayne attack from the south and slow the British advance, meaning that'll give time, hopefully, for Washington to do something. What Wayne wants is attack the British Army by having Washington join him on the attack from the front and pin them against the swollen Schuylkill River to the north. And what Washington's orders say, if you haven't read that message or remember that message, he's saying, I'm going to position myself behind the British. So he wants to get behind the British, having Wayne on and Smallwood on the other side to again and form a pincer movement to surround and take care of Howe's army. So those are the two different things that's going through the heads of Wayne and Washington at this point. Now remember, Wayne has been out of contact with Washington. He doesn't know what Washington's doing. Washington's crossing the Schuylkill at Parker's Ford, which means he's actually moving away from the Americans at that point. So as you can see, what Wayne wants, here's the Maryland Militia. They're right now probably on their way to the, gotta remember the name, the White Horse Tavern, a very popular tavern in Chester County, also kind of where the Battle of Clouds retreat point was. That was the road junction that centered on all these roads fanning out into the valley to help cross the Schuylkill River. So that's why it was a key strategic location for Clouds. And here it is coming up on Paoli because there's a large tavern there. Again, a center of their road network. Wayne is over here in Paoli, or actually in Wayne, in Malvern. What they want to do is once the Maryland Militia join up, have Washington join them and push them against the Schuylkill River. And the reason is, of course, the Battle of Clouds has happened on the 16th. The river has risen from all the rain that they got. The road network is really torn apart. It's very muddy at this point, especially in the lower parts of the valley, because you not only had the British troops on them, but you had the American troops on them. So you can imagine about 20 to 30,000 troops on these muddy roads, what a quagmire the roads are going to be. So on the evening of the 20th, General Anthony Wayne gets two warnings. The first one is from Colonel John Bartholomew. He's a local militia officer, and he gives a warning of an impending attack around 6 o'clock. Old Man Jones, you got to love these names. Sounds like a Scooby-Doo man. Elderly citizen who heard it at a tavern from a servant who overheard it from British soldiers, but both Jones and the servant are personally known by Wayne. And that warning comes between 8 p.m. and 10 p.m. Also with these attacks, his second in command, Richard Humpton, is not here. Colonel Thomas Hartley is. So when those warnings are given, Humpton has no idea about it. Later on, he's going to find out about those warnings after the battle, and he's going to be a thorn in General Anthony Wayne's side during his court of inquiry and during his court-martial. Wayne sets up 2 additional pickets and also mounted patrols. So he doesn't do nothing with these warnings. He does set up more picket posts, and he sets out these mounted men to find out exactly where the British are coming from so he can get his men ready to leave if they need to. The reason he wants to stay there, that is because the Maryland Militia are very close. They're about maybe 2-3 miles from his position. So he doesn't want to move on them without telling them where he's going. So he's waiting there for them. And he also thinks maybe these warnings are false and they might not pan out to be so. So before we understand, or before we start going through what happened, I just want to tell you about a certain picket post here. There's a person I like to call sort of one of the heroes of Paoli. His name is Samuel Brady. And Lieutenant Samuel Brady of Doyle's Independent Company was lying on guard duty at picket post number 3. He lay down with his blanket buckled around him. As the British struck, Brady bolted up and ran and was struck with a bayonet, which stuck him to a fence rail by the blanket. So again, the British troops are coming in with their bayonet. They hit him in the blanket. They pin him temporarily against the fence. So Brady tears off his blanket and runs off. He has his musket with him. A horseman overtakes him and orders him to stop. He wheeled, shot the horseman, and ran into a small swamp, supposing no one in it but himself. So at this point, he's in a swamp. It's at night. He hears the battle raging all around him. He's trying to keep his head down and keep out of sight. And as the battle is raging, and then in the morning, as the first lights start showing upon the battlefield, and after the British have left, he ducks his head up and he finds 55 other men inside the same swamp doing what he's doing. But he does lead those men back to meet up with General Anthony Wayne's men in Euclid Township at the Red Lion Tavern is where they finally meet. So the picket map, you can see Anthony Wayne's camp here in Malvern. Here's the Paoli Tavern. Waynesboro's over here. You can see the different picket posts. He has one close to the Paoli Tavern. He has one out here by Paoli and Warren Road. Here's picket post number 3. This is where Brady was attacked. And picket post 3, picket post 4, picket post 5, picket post 6. So he has different pickets around his camp to tell him which way to go. Now, if you look at this picture, Gray's troops are coming down Sweetsford Road. They're going to get to Moore Hill Road, which is present-day Route 29. The American Horse Patrol sees the British and they fire in the air to warn General Wayne that definitely the British are on their way. And Wayne only has probably about maybe 15 to 30 minutes. So he gets his men up in his camp. He says, "Arise, boys, the lads are here." So he knows the British are definitely coming. They do a little fighting withdrawal down to the Warren Tavern, which you'll see here. This is actually not the General Warren Tavern. It's the Admiral Warren Tavern at this time. It's for a British war hero, not an American, not obviously, as we know, Joseph Warren, the hero of the Battle of, actually one of the Sons of Liberty, and he died at the Battle of Bunker Hill. The picket post number 5 that was near the Warren Tavern flees. Picket post number 4, actually, they're trying to find Anthony Wayne's camp at this point. So General Gray asked the innkeeper where General Wayne's camp is. And the innkeeper does a great thing. I have no idea where it is, but you know what? That blacksmith who lives right down the corner of the road, he knows exactly where it is. He's been to that camp. So they go drag this poor blacksmith out of his house after midnight, take him up to the 3rd floor of the Warren Tavern and coerce him into leading them to the American camp. And this was probably just the way he wrote, but if General Gray would have gone down this road to which leads to Sugartown Road, he would have gotten behind the American camp and pushed them all the way to the Paoli Tavern. Instead, he leads them up what's called Longford Avenue, and he's going to attack Wayne's camp on this side. And here's where picket post number 3 is. Their artillery, supply wagons, all that are in Anthony Wayne's camp. So that's a battle, or that's a quick map of the Battle of Paoli. Now, as far as the waves of attack that are going to come in, 2nd Light Infantry is going to be the first ones in. They're armed with the Pennsylvania long rifle. The Pennsylvania long rifle is not a musket, meaning it does not have a bayonet on the end, and it is slower to load than a musket because of the grooved barrel. So these men are going to go in there, they're going to have a chance to maybe fire one shot, and then these bayonets are going to be on them from the British 2nd Light Infantry. So I'm going to read to you now a passage of the battle. Now, at this point, Anthony Wayne has his camp ready to leave. He's going to have his 4 cannon, which have to make their way all the way across the camp. They have to go through 3 different fence openings, and they have to get out on Sugartown Road. That'll be the first thing that has to happen. Second thing is the 26 quartermaster and supply wagons are going to go out next. And then finally, his men, which are now lined up and facing Sugartown Road with their back to the enemy, they're going to go out last. So what does he do to buy time? He's going to send the 1st Pennsylvania into the woods to hopefully hold back the British in time for him to get his men out. So Wayne leads the 1st Pennsylvania into the woods, many of the regiment being long riflemen. As I said, the long rifle had 2 disadvantages. It was slower to load, and it was not designed to hold a bayonet. Looking back in the camp, Anthony Wayne saw for some reason his troops had stopped and were standing about 70 yards away. The time to effect an orderly withdrawal bought with the lives of the pickets was growing shorter. On the opposite edge of the woods, the British light infantry column halted, faced right, and charged with their bayonets. Letting out a throaty huzzah, such a cheer made the woods echo as they rushed forward. Caught in the midst of reloading and facing the steel-tipped onslaught crashing towards them through the dark underbrush a few feet away, the 1st Pennsylvania Regiment fell back and out of the woods, ran into camp with the British light infantry in hot pursuit. Ahead of them at the rear of the stalled column and facing the opposite direction was the 7th Pennsylvania Regiment. This regiment took a brunt of the light infantry charge and suffered serious loss. The wave of the first attack, the British light infantrymen entered the camp, struck the rear of the stalled column, and surrounded it like a horseshoe. Why was this column stalled? Wayne rides to the opposite end of camp, and when he arrives around Sugartown Road, he discovers Colonel Adam Hubley fell with one of the 4 field pieces, the carriage of which had lost its hind wheels. In the haste of the retreat, the jarring and bouncing of the speeding cannon knocked the wheels off the carriage. The artillery broke down in the middle of the road and caused the wagons to jam up behind it. So effectively, as a traffic jam, he has these small little openings and fences just to get his wagons, his cannons, and his men out with, because he's a farmer. He's on farmland of friends of his. These are friends of American independence. So he doesn't want to damage beyond more than what he can. So at this point, he's just trying to get his men through these small openings. And that is obviously going to cause a problem. So his troops start now pulling apart the fences, trying to get out because they hear the screams in back of them. By the time Wayne arrives, the carriage has been dragged off the road, but the men are still trying to rehitch the gun. So they're still causing a delay trying to put this field piece together instead of just throwing it off the side of the road and letting these people out. Wayne later wrote to Washington that one of her pieces met with misfortune on the field of action, which impeded us considerable time. So you can see what a cool hand Luke he was by that comment. Got to get the right piece here, excuse me. Okay, aides rode up and down, barking orders to move out. Desperate attempts were made to lift, drag, or rehitch the gun as others worked to pull apart the stout fences on the west side of the road. All the while, minutes ticked away and the infantry still awaited orders. The shots and screams in the distance coming ever closer. And then with a bloody chill, the cold steel of the British bayonet charge slammed into the rear of the column and all hell broke loose. A sudden thunderous roar with loud shouts and a trumpet blast announced the second wave of attackers. With saber blades drawn, a dozen or so troopers of the Queen's Own Light Dragoons swept across the camp and swarmed around the rear of the shaken 1st Brigade, installing even more panic. Lieutenant Richard St. George, again, here's the author of the painting, of the British Light Infantry, described a dreadful scene of havoc. The Light Dragoons came on sword in hand. The shrieks, groans, and shouting, the clashing of swords and of bayonets was more expressive of horror than all the thunder of artillery on the day of action. 3-foot-long saber blades flashed in the firelight, cutting men up and cutting men down. Another loud huzzah rang out. Another wall of bayonets. The 44th Regiment of Foot poured out of the woods. Another wave of panic swept through the stalled column. This attack headed more towards the camp itself, as the rear of the stalled column, already surrounded by the light infantry, further disintegrated and sporadically moved ahead. The British have most of the woods surrounded, and many go back and run out of the woods and attack the British along the fence lines from the flanks and rear. Meanwhile, on Upper Longford Road, at the right flank of the camp, yet another force, the largest and most terrifying menace of the night, lurked in the shadows and prepared to descend like a horde of banshees. 2 battalions of the 42nd, or Royal Highlander Regiment, known as the Black Watch, formed double-rank battle line, let out a screeching Highlander war yell, and advanced into camp. This was the 3rd wave through the camp, and it was to be a thorough sweep-up. Rushed in upon the encampment, directed by the lights of the fires, they killed and wounded no less than 300 in their huts and about their fires. The 42nd set fire to them, as many of the enemy would not come out, choosing rather to suffer in the flames than be killed by the British bayonet. Lieutenant Martin Hunter, the British Light Infantry, remember he's the man who got wounded in the hand, said the camp was immediately set upon fire. The light infantry bayoneted every man they came upon. This, with the cries of the wounded, formed altogether the most dreadful scene ever beheld. Every man that fired was instantly put to death. Meanwhile, Anthony Wayne organized a rear guard to cover the retreat. As officers and men struggled to move the disabled cannon off the road, Wayne ordered the 4th Pennsylvania Regiment, the first line of the column facing the road, to go back into the woods on the right and form a battle line. This movement enabled the rest of the 2nd Brigade in the column to move ahead perhaps 100 yards. The 4th helped cover the withdrawal of the rest of the column by firing volleys at the British troops in the woods. As the King's men closed in, Marion Lamar, the 4th Pennsylvania, said, "Halt, boys, and give those assassins one fire." Captain Benjamin Byrd of the 4th, who commanded the left platoon of General Wayne's division, which headed the column, later saw Lamar bayoneted on horseback a few yards from him. The stricken major fell from his horse mortally wounded, the highest ranking American soldier killed in the battle. The 4th fell back through the woods into the open field near the crossroads on the left, where Wayne yet again rallied troops to cover the retreat. General Wayne now orders Major Caleb North of the 10th Pennsylvania to find General Smallwood and rendezvous at the White Horse Tavern. So he's thinking ahead. Remember those Maryland militiamen? Well, they're coming down the road at the wrong time. General Smallwood writes in his diary, he said, about 12 o'clock, our front approached within a mile of his encampment. We were alarmed by his camp being routed. My guides, one of whom, Colonel Chambers, commanded a Continental regiment, were much disconcerted and could not or would not point out my route further. In this situation, I have nothing left but retreat about a mile to advantageous ground I had observed earlier. If you're familiar with the area, it's probably the point where 352 and King Road meet. That's the plateau of that valley. So that's where he's going to turn his troops around and do it. Now, there is a friendly fire incident between Wayne's troops and the Maryland Militia when they first start streaming down the road, but eventually gets his men under command, and they successfully turn around in the road, and they're going to go back to where they came from. Now, he says, as the militia force was moving west on King Road, something unexpectedly took place. They were fired upon by the enemy. For some reason, the British light infantry at this stage of the battle, the chase was on, and their enthusiasm was not to be checked. With rebel stragglers on the run and few British officers to observe or identify the culprits in the dark, some of Major Maitland's bloodhounds opened fire. Maitland had permission from Gray to keep his arms loaded, but if they fired, he would suffer severe consequence. So Smallwood at this point writes in his diary, one of our men about the center of our main body was shot dead by some of the British stragglers, which threw a great part of our line in great consternation. Many flung down their guns and ran off and have not been heard from since. Others broke their orders and got into the utmost confusion. Just when things seem to have settled down, he gets his troops in line, starts marching down the road, but this time, he said, the party lie in ambush ahead of them. A firing broke out and was so close and unpredicted that the militia immediately broke and left us no possibility of rallying them. The artillerymen and wagoners cut their horses loose and ran off with them. And then to add insult to injury, after all this happens, Smallwood goes forward to scout the road. As he turns back and comes back, his own troops fire on his party, killing a light horseman and injuring several others. So it's not a great attack by General Smallwood. So General Smallwood and Anthony Wayne are going to meet up at the White Horse Tavern. The British are going to curtail their pursuit after they chase basically the men away from the battlefield general area. They're going to stay there for a few hours, and then they're going to go back to the camp at Different. But the wounded and killed at Paoli, here's the guys from the 7th PA, 17 stab wounds in Captain Andrew Irvine. Captain Robert Wilson stabbed in the side, bashed in the forehead. Then the next two I picked out were a fife and drum major. The fife major, Richard Stack of the 7th, stabbed 13 times and taken prisoner. Drum major Daniel St. Clair of Hartley's additional regiment. So he's listed as severely mutilated. What happened to him was one of the horsemen came by and pulled his saber blade up and came down upon St. Clair. He put his hand up to block it. It took off all his fingers and poked his eye out. Private John Sneed, 11th PA, wounded in 14 different parts of his body. And then there's a man here called the Virginian. This gentleman was wounded 46 distinct bayonet wounds. There's a story, but I'll skip it now for the sake of time. 52 are buried in a burial mound at the fence line between the properties of Ezekiel Bowen and Cromwell Pierce, where most of the bodies lie. The battle actually happened on 2 parcels of land, one owned by Ezekiel Bowen, one owned by Cromwell Pierce. Cromwell Pierce is a major in the Chester County Militia. His house still stands, though. It's on, I think, along King Street. And you'll see, I think, ivy growing along the fence and onto the house. That is his house. If you do happen to drive by King Street in Malvern, you can see that. One is later found in the battlefield about a week later, and he's buried where he lies. So there is a total of 53 men buried. 52 are at the monument that's there. One's later buried, as I said, a week later where he lie. And again, we talk about the massacre aspect of this. The Continental forces have about 300 dead, missing, or wounded. The British suffer 11 dead, missing, and wounded. So this is a heavy British victory. Only 1 British officer killed, William Wolfe. And we talked about as I said, Major John Andre, who's a captain at that point, said 71 prisoners are captured. As they enter back at camp, less than 40 arrive back. and they're left off at the houses along the way because they're too badly wounded to continue. Remember, this is a bayonet fight. This isn't a shooting fight. So you have to get up close and personal to the person to actually give them the bayonet or the sword. And you can imagine that thing slicing you open 13, 14, 17, 46 times. There's going to be infection that sets in as well, because you're moving on from one man and using that same weapon on another person. So a lot of these men are too badly wounded. They're left at houses. Howe actually writes a letter to Washington saying, hey, you better come down here with your surgeons and take care of these men, because I have better things to do. And Washington's going to have to find a way to take care of these men and get the doctors down to these houses. The Pennsylvania line is going to want revenge for this battle, because they're going to call it the Paoli Massacre. Well, the British light infantry and their bluff and bravado said, we're going to take those black feathers that we had, we're going to dip them in the red ink, and we're going to have red feathers in our hat. So when you see us, we're going to have the red feathers in the hat. We're the 2nd Light Infantry. And this tradition continues all the way today. There's a red mark on the 49th of Foot was actually presented this award, but it goes all the way to the Royal Berkshire Regiment. They still wear it today, the red patch on their hat. That's actually called the Brandywine Flash. It actually should have been called the Paoli Flash, because it was awarded to the regiment for their actions of the Light Infantry Company of the 49th of Foot, who took part in a night attack at a location called Paoli. So that's where that flash came from. They're decorated by the British, and through all the evolutions of where the 49th of Foot got got into this regiment, they still kept this marking going back to the Battle of Paoli as one of their honored things that they can wear on their uniform. So you can see how important this was to the British. All that bluff and bravado during the Battle of Germantown, as Mike had mentioned, the Chew Mansion becomes a scene. And guess who's trapped in the Chew Mansion? The 2nd Light Infantry is trapped in the Chew Mansion, and the Pennsylvania troops go nuts. They start yelling, revenge Wayne's affair, and remember Paoli. And this is the first use of the remember phrase. We're all used to remember 9/11, remember Pearl Harbor, remember the Lusitania. Well, it all came from remember Pearl Harbor. That was the first, or remember Paoli. That was the first use of the phrase in the Americas. After the Battle of Germantown is over, Colonel Humpton is making such a stink, along with a couple other 4 or 5 officers, that Colonel Wayne is called for a court of inquiry for what he did at Paoli. Now, the papers are lost, but we know that they did not vindicate Anthony Wayne's conduct to his satisfaction. So in that day, if you don't get the court of inquiry to see what to agree with you, you're then going to have to call a court martial. That's exactly what Anthony Wayne does. He demands a court martial. So they meet. 5 generals, 5 colonels, 3 lieutenants sat in on the court. General John Sullivan acts as president. And on November 1st, 1777, the verdict of the Continental Army was announced. I can't do this with my best dragnet voice, but the court martial was unanimous of the opinion that General Wayne was not guilty of the charge exhibited against him, and that he, on the night of September 20, did every duty that can be expected from an active, brave, vigilant officer under the orders which he had. The court do acquit him with the highest honor. So he's restored back into the army. He fights he's at Valley Forge. He's at the Battle of Monmouth. He does drop out to help the Pennsylvania legislature out. And then in 1779, Washington reels him back for this Battle of Stony Point. He wants a light infantry attack on Stony Point, and he chooses Anthony Wayne. Anthony Wayne learns this, uses the lessons learned from Paoli to help storm the fort, and he is successful. There are no atrocities. He wins a gold medal from Congress for his conduct and for winning the Battle of Stony Point. There's a fresco in the United States Capitol that shows Wayne being carried over the parapets by his troops. Back in Paoli in 1817, as the farmers' plows are getting closer to the burial mound, a wall is built and a monument is erected by William Strickland, very famous architect. He designed the crypt at Mount Vernon for George Washington. A wall is built around it, and it's used to honor the victims, the 52 that were buried there at that mass grave. 100 years later, another monument's put up because, as you can see, the other monument, vandals have stole the base of it. Souvenir hunters have chipped away at it. So they created this new monument in 1877 around the base. The same inscriptions are here, are found on the original monument. So if you show up at Paoli, you can read that. But in closing this all out, remember Paoli is our legacy and origin point of the remember phrase. It was used to rally troops since the revolution, but can also be used to remind us of how our humanity and better angels should be used on the battlefield and beyond. So that's my presentation. So I'll take any questions at this point.
Jim, before we get to questions, why don't you talk a little bit about what's preserved and what isn't, and what you're trying to accomplish with preservation. Preservation is one of the primary objectives of what we do with the Chambersburg Civil War Seminar. So I want to give you the opportunity to talk about it.
Well, the possession of the field where the battle was fought is much smaller than it is. Probably less than half of what the battlefield is now has been saved. Malvern Prep owned it, was the owner of it around the 1990s. They were going to sell part of that land for development. And this is mainline real estate. They were going to get a pretty penny for it. One of the teachers there that taught history, Tom McGuire, decided not to, see if there was a way we could save the land. And in talking with Malvern Borough, the person who helped that was Thomas McGuckin. He was actually a master sergeant in the Army, and they both led the efforts to save the battlefield. They went to Malvern Prep. Malvern Prep said, you have a year or 2 years to raise $2.4 million. That's the assessment with nothing on the land. That's how much the land, just the land alone, was worth. So we did a lot of different ways to raise money. We went to schools and did pennies for Paoli, where school kids would give us pennies to help save the battlefield. We did other fundraising. And then finally, we saw we were going to end up short. We went to Kurt Weldon, who was our U.S. representative at the time. And he passed through one of the first, it was called the Patriot Act in 1998 or 1999. And basically, it gave money to Brandywine and also for preservation and for buying land for the Brandywine battlefield, and also helped us purchase the property from Malvern Prep. The problem was they couldn't transfer ownership to us. It had to stay within the borough. The government can't pay a person, they have to pay a government entity. So they paid the borough of Malvern part. We put in the other part of the money. That money was then given to Malvern Prep. So today, part of it is owned by what's called is owned by the Malvern Borough. The other part, the monuments and all the land on the western side of the battlefield, that is owned by the Paoli Memorial Association. And the Paoli Memorial Association came into being around the turn of the 19th century or 20th century, when the land was being run down. The militia companies who were in charge of it were basically broken apart, and they decided to form this Paoli Memorial Association to keep the memorial grounds safe. And they own the land. We own the other part of the land. So it's about 64 acres now that's saved of the original Paoli battlefield. The rest, there's development on First Avenue, there's development along Monument Avenue, and obviously where the Malvern Borough building sits, and across it, there's churches and there's buildings along, as I said, First Avenue. That's all been encroached upon. But
well, considering that's some of the most expensive real estate in southeastern Pennsylvania around there, that's pretty good.
Exactly. We're trying now to get national landmark status from the National Park Service to have the land federally protected. And that's kind of where we are at this point right now. We've updated our registry. We've even wrote some parts of the Philadelphia campaign for the National Park Service, so that if other sites do want to become landmarks, some of the research is already done for the Philadelphia campaign, thanks to one of our grants. So the last grant we're going to get after we update the registry is to actually apply for national landmark status.
That's terrific. To our participants, I would encourage you to support Jim's organization and its efforts. Jim, we don't have any questions, but we do have an observation that I'll pass along here before we break for lunch. And that is, there is quite a contrast between the massive number of bayonet wounds at Paoli and the relatively limited number of bayonet wounds that we see in the American Civil War. So this was obviously an up close and personal fight.
Yes, it was. And it affected the soldiers afterwards, especially Lieutenant St. George. He has nightmares about it. And that's one of the therapies that he has, is to sketch out and write out and paint and help get Delegata make that painting to kind of get it out of his system.
Even then, there was such a thing as PTSD.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Jim, for an excellent and enlightening talk.